Hi. So it's been kind of a wild week for me, and it's interesting that you know as the continued commitment to read aloud the entire book this year. I don't know how well I'm tracking to this, but I'm gonna have to pick up the pace here. It's been kind of so. I just made a video about managing stress and overwhelm, which kind of lands this at a it's kind of like the right, I guess, like a good time for doing a live reading about interruptions and stressors. The thing was, I actually made the video about stress and overwhelm based off of, a lot of times when I'm making these videos, they're not actually in sync with how, like, the reading of the book. And right now, as I'm working with people, it's listening to what people have to say, how they're responding to the book, and like working with themes of things that are arising. And for me personally, this week, as far as like stress and overwhelm, this week reminded me that I'm a practitioner of the Parinama method. And so the video I made was, first of all, and like reflective of my own experience this week. And second of all, it's just, it's a really common thing to be talking with people about, the things that are overwhelming them. And so video number 7 is uploading as we speak right now. So I thought I'd take the time and just read a little bit. And this is starting at chapter 21. So I'm gonna do the best I can, and as I've said in previously, one of the things about this is like having a commitment to really get through this means that and this will come up later in the book, is just showing up at the best I can. And on some days that's not like super fantastic. I'm feeling a little better. I did one on Friday that was like felt pretty rough and a little like jangled. But today I'm feeling kind of more rested and ready. So we'll see how this goes. Coming into this, realizing that this was going to be the section I was reading, I contemplated whether, after having a week with, nothing that I'd consider to be like massively disruptive, but certainly somatically disruptive, and fully recoverable, I might add. I was wondering how it was going to feel to read through these, and we'll see. TBD. So if you're along for the ride, thank you. And here we go. So this is on page 21. And also, maybe it's worth mentioning that we have just read through in the previous read throughs. We've talked about the initial development of each of the hubs, the basics, and the themes. And this is the learn section. So in the individual hub chapters, when we learn what the hub is, we're looking at the initial development, the basics, and the themes. And now the understand part of the method is understanding interruptions and stressors. And then next comes knowing adaptations and holding patterns, and then expanding through exercises and techniques. So in chapter 2, we're at interruptions and stressors. So here we go. So stressors are events and phenomena that interfere and interrupt the natural occurring and healthy development of a hub. They include the events and behaviors we directly experience happening to us and those we witness happening to others. A resulting interruption is how these events and behaviors affect the development of a hub. Healthy and normal are subjective assessments without clear definitions. They are more commonly identified by what they are not. That's not normal, rather than an explanation of what normal could be. The psychiatric profession defines all kinds of so-called abnormal psychology, but has no agreed upon standard of normalcy. There's too much dynamism in psychological functioning. Normal simply doesn't exist. Healthy, in the Parinama method, simply means that the human rights and boundaries of the hub have not been significantly denied or invaded. Yeah. We won't remember the stressors from our early years, especially those from the development of the first three hubs, before episodic memory is neurologically possible. And we don't need to. But reflection and excavation can help connect rational cognition to make sense of deeper subconscious reflexes. That is, unless remembering causes distress or even re traumatization. Relatively simple way to test for interruption in a hub is whether you resist or believe that a human right or boundary is a birthright or a privilege to be earned. Interruption separates us from our humanity, having us believe we need to earn dignity. Hmm. The point of exploring interruptions and stressors is not to find people to blame. Nobody wants to be incapable, and folks don't tend to consciously understand why they cause harm. Expecting people to take responsibility for hurting us is often above and beyond their capacity, and holding them accountable is often a challenging, ongoing process. There are many ways people cope with the pain of hurting you, such as through denial, diminishing, and dissociation. Psychologist Alice Miller wrote in The Drama of the Gift, who was not allowed to be aware of what was done to them, a way of telling about it, except to repeat it. The purpose of exploring interruptions is to better understand and evaluate the events that shaped your life so that you're better positioned to evaluate how you want to proceed with protecting yourself by creating boundaries, holding people accountable, and becoming aware of your own behavior. Our awareness of stressors and interruptions serves us by bringing our own behavior into the light of consciousness, but be mindful to stay within your window of tolerance. This exploration of early experiences can be distressing and disturbing if it's rushed and forced. You may find yourself questioning and recoiling at the notion that human rights are to be given without having been earned. But the fact is, they can only be taken away, as they so often are, which can lead to belief systems such as experiencing difficulty is a necessary evil. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, when I read this, I think one of the things I feel like this is pretty like I still feel like this is pretty on point, but it is interesting that there's an evolution of thought around it where even some of the nuances I feel are I have a personally have a you know, have like more different sort of layers of clarity on. But yes, I would. So I guess I'd still say yes to this. Um, so yeah, yeah. There's a lot in here. That's I mean, it's one of the things I actually find. I think I've said this before. Is that um, people will say to me, that, they're like, "Oh, I feel embarrassed, I don't remember," or I can't, like, recall they read it something and they're like, "I can't really, like, bring it up," but, and like, I can't remember the specifics of it. And, I mean, even just in was that 3 paragraphs, there's a lot in there. There's a lot to unpack. I mean, things like the fact that psychology has no definition of normal, only abnormal, and, like, what healthy and normal are. I think there's a lot in that. There's another, part in this that's really important, which is to the extent you need to explore the interruptions and stressors and, from a somatic therapist, and I'm not a somatic therapist, but, like, the leaders of, in this field, are real tend to be very clear about the fact that the events are stored as reactions that didn't get to fully express themselves in our body. So the necessity to do the deeper dive into the events that created those stuck responses is not necessary. Um, and one of the things, so I think it's really an important thing to notice if there is the feeling of overstimulation when evaluating the like past events as they like reflect as they as as they relate to you rather. is that if they're overstimulating, it's really, just pay attention to that and either just kind of like slow down, back off, or just consider another approach in which is potentially looking at adaptations and holding patterns and just looking for those and working through those somatically. I find that the evaluation of, like looking at this at the interruptions and stressors is helpful for the process of the relationship with oneself, which is to understand that the forming circumstances and situations that created our survival adaptation patterns were, out of our control. And so, like there's, on one hand, the notion that it's like it's not necessary to know these things per se, but on the other hand, that it's helpful to understand contextually. And I think that this is where, with the Parinama method, it's about yoking all of the areas of the brain together, yoking reflex, yoking emotion, and yoking cognitive capability. Like if you'll remember from earlier in the book, the triune brain. So instead of just like reaching into the physical response, it's not leaving the cognitive capability, to like, as sort of, like aside. It's bringing it all together, and in a way that I think is pretty effective. All right. So the interruptions and stressors. So one of the things about Parinama method is, like, one will perhaps notice is that as far as what trauma is, there's, it doesn't, it's, we're talking about things that are, I guess, right now in the kind of cultural parlance, like trauma. And, but the take on this here that we're taking here, that I'm taking here, is actually something that's just more about like interruptions and stressors, where, in chapter, I think it's 5, which is the second hub, we talk about like capital T and lower T trauma. But this is just more about shaping factors, and like the notion of trauma sometimes having a meaning that kind of like cuts the circuit off from people being willing to explore it, especially if it doesn't feel natural to like identify with trauma, because it does, for what it like like what the word means for a lot of people. So in the process of developing this, this was actually a point of, like, a long point of contemplation and consideration, which is like, well, how do you describe by hub the impact of events, and like what would the context be? And so it's the conditions, it's human rights and conditions of life and boundaries. So the idea that within each hub, like the functioning of it, the development of it, its capacity is, informed by the observation of human rights associated with it, and the boundaries associated with it being developed and respected. So here, let's give it a read. So human rights and the conditions of life. All right, here we go. This one's kind of holds a uh, is an opinion, strong opinion. So many of us live in so-called meritocratic. What is it? Meritocratic. Why am I not? It's meritocracy. Meritocratic cultures. The idea that we get and deserve what we earn. There's a lot of cultural mythology supporting the cruelty of meritocracy, and the simplicity of this belief crowds out the harsh reality of the inequality of opportunity distribution. The token animal of meritocracy is the lion, an apex predator. But what the mythology doesn't include is the reality that apex predators tend to be bad at hunting. A lion's kill rate is about 25%. It gains its apex status by stealing and scavenging the kills of so-called betas, such as African painted dogs, APDs, which have a successful kill rate of closer to 90%. While believing in meritocracy often causes disdain for so-called losers, ultimately it's a torturous pattern of outrunning feelings of unworthiness, resulting in burnout and punishing standards for the so-called winners. The following human rights for each hub are every person's birthright. In the process of reclaiming them, even though they were always ours to begin with, can be difficult. It starts with knowing that simply being alive establishes worthiness. Existence is the only merit required for a human life to be valuable and important. First hub human rights. The right to be here, the right to take up space. Working in this right can feel deep and confronting. When we reclaim the first hub, we get better at caring for our physical body and build trust in ourselves and in our self-worth. The central tenet of this hub is trusting that you will have your essential survival needs met. The right to exist and take up space. The right to physical security. The right to have what you need to survive. The right to sovereign ownership of your physical body. One thing I'd add to this is that, culture can inform our sense of whether this is true or not. And, I did read these in a live stream a week or so ago. And one of the things I think about these rights and even how our culture can be interrupting to us is the belief that the right to actually have like healthcare, housing, food, these basic needs met to the best of the social, the society's ability is it's a cultural belief system, and that we come to believe is like absolute truths. But there certainly are, like when I was reading about anthropology and other cultures, just how common it is, especially for indigenous cultures, to really incorporate folks who are not like able to like contribute in traditional senses at the same level of others as equal members who are cared for and incorporated into the group. It's a cultural thing that especially, at least in the culture I'm in, is can be can raise a discussion. So the second hub, human rights, the right to feel and express emotions, the right to want things for yourself, and the right to experience joy and pleasure. Author Anadea Judith writes, if we cannot feel, it is very difficult to know what we want. She points out how cultures that frown on emotional expression or consider sensitivity a weakness infringe on the basic right to feel. So this is the right to feel, the right to express emotions, the right to want, and the right to need. Third hub, human rights, the right to personal autonomy and the right to act freely from personal integrity. Judith writes, cultures with narrowly defined behavior patterns impair the right to act through punishment and the enforcement of blind obedience. Many people fear straying from a path of conformity and obedience because as children they were punished and taught to be well behaved. For people who have been victims of oppression and injustice, it is their human right to express their natural and justifiable anger if it does not cause harm to others. So this is the right to act, the right to be free, the right to be an individual. Fourth hub, human rights, the right to love and be loved, the right to be treated with dignity. All human beings, regardless of perceived merit, are worthy and deserving of love and compassion. This doesn't mean that you are personally responsible for supplying it. There are people who are shocking and their actions may be unforgivable to you. You do not need to love or accept their actions, but it is their human right to receive the redemption and healing power of love, and to interfere with this is an act of interruption. A lack of compassion for other people is almost always the result or results in a lack of compassion for ourselves. So this is the right to love, the right to be loved, the right of human dignity for all people, and the right to feel worthiness without conditions. So, fifth hub, human rights, to speak and express your personal truth and be told the truth. Mature adult functioning in this hub uses constructive outlets for expression. If your truth is being suppressed, the first step is to be aware of it, and the next step is finding the right outlet. There's also the matter of speaking up against injustice, which can be interrupted by cultural programming against breaking ranks with the status quo. Speaking for the safety of others can put your own safety at risk. So the rights here, the right to speak your truth, the right to be told the truth, the right to be heard, the right to self-expression and integrity. So sixth hub, human rights, the right to be seen as who you are without punishment or cruelty. This is the right to express yourself with integrity and imagination so that your outside reflects what you feel inside in a way that is right for you, and to do it without experiencing retaliation or cruelty. This right is the visual expression of your emblem. See chapter 3, coming later, to the world and be experienced by recognizing yourself when you see your reflection. This is the right to see, the right to be seen and validated, the right to dream of possibility and potential, the right to explore and develop inner vision. And the seventh hub, human right, is the right to inquire, the right to know, and the right to receive answers. This is the right to information, education, and knowledge, to have your own thoughts and ideas, and to explore your interests without being controlled or indoctrinated. This hub also contains the right to have a spiritual practice if it doesn't interfere with the individual rights of others. So the right to education and spiritual exploration, the right to your own beliefs, both intellectual and spiritual, the right to experience peace, and the right to change your mind. Boop, that's a big one. So, all right, where are we at for time? We're about 22 minutes. I think I'm just gonna, I'm gonna try. I'm going to try to go for it. I'm going to read the first page of the boundaries and on page 24. And then next time, I'm going to read through the 7 hub boundaries individually. So boundaries. The first spell aspiring magicians learn is one of protection. To safely operate in the world, as a magician or otherwise, we must uphold parameters with discernment. Boundaries are part of the standard we keep for ourselves. Therapist Nedra Glover Tawwab writes, "In set boundaries, find peace," that when we create healthy boundaries, it leads to feeling safe, loved, calm, and respected. By the way, fantastic book. Also follow her on Instagram. She's extraordinary. According to Tawwab, healthy boundaries involve self-awareness, clear communication, and action. If they are not taught and respected during your childhood, they were likely disregarded or invaded. Similar to the human rights, if these feel overly sensitive, there's potential for interruption in the associated hub. Each hub has a specific boundary, and healthy containment happens when it's neither too porous nor too rigid. On the one hand, if we always say yes, despite being chronically overwhelmed, resentful, overextended, disrespected, and needing approval, we have what Tawwab calls porous boundaries. A common fantasy for folks with porous boundaries is wanting to escape, hide, and run away from the demands of others. On the other hand, if we always say no, regardless of circumstances and without exception, we have rigid and excessive boundaries, acting overly guarded and walling people off without communication as a defensive reflex. When boundaries are like impenetrable walls, they often involve disdain for behaviors like delegation and asking for help, and can involve perfectionism and protective isolation from other people, masquerading as feelings of superiority over them. By increasing awareness of our boundaries, we can grow the capability to calmly uphold and enforce them. Having the awareness that they exist is the first step towards developing them. The second step is having the ability to communicate and uphold limits that keep you feeling safe and protected, removing the feeling that the only options are to escape or hide behind walls. That's nice. A boundary is like a force field that allows you to decide who's let in and how close they're permitted to be. Since boundary invasions often occur because we're unaware that we can and should set and enforce them, we may feel odd or even second guess ourselves when they're broken. And it goes both ways. If we don't understand our own, how can we understand them for other people? Sometimes they get interrupted as rejection, as they get rather, sometimes they get interpreted as rejection, coldness, and or folks feeling unworthy or unwanted. Folks who don't appreciate when boundaries are being upheld often will be those who've benefited from the lack of them. Expect them to be vocal about your enforcement, expressing their belief that you're being selfish and uncaring. Objection to a stated boundary is a clear indication of a boundary invader. Telling someone you'd like physical or mental space should be the final word on the matter. It's a red flag if the response you receive is being told you're being too sensitive or that you're wrong for asking. If telling someone that something makes you uncomfortable doesn't immediately cause the person to back up or make space, that person is a boundary invader. And that's all the information you need to further enforce. Boundaries are yours to know and enforce, and the more you know your own, the more you can see and respect them for others. People who know their boundaries feel safer within themselves, and people who interact with boundary-aware folks may feel a greater trust and ease, which they usually can't identify specifically, but do sense and appreciate. These are good. This gives me energy. This really does give me energy, but I don't think I can keep going as much as I really want to, because it's like a lot of people have given me feedback about this section of the book, and just reading it right now, I really see why, especially as we're about to go into the boundaries. And as like the opening where I was thinking, I was like, is this going to be intense? It's actually uplifting. I think it's in the individual hub chapters in part 2 where examination of like the real specific aspects of interruption and stress can be hard. But this actually is like more of a positive, uplifting manifesto. Um, I think it's really like actually felt really good. So anyhow, as I continue to make these videos, first of all, if you've made it this far, thank you. I just love you so much. It is absolutely, my commitment to do everything within reason at this point to keep improving what I'm offering, along with with this method and bringing it into the world and continuing its growth and its impact. So anything you have as far as thoughts about what would be more helpful for you in terms of materials, I really welcome the feedback, and even thoughts about disagreeing with things I'm saying, or adding to it, having thoughts about like how to even like iterate and bring more thought about and add personal experience. It's amazing for me to hear people like really add like, this isn't the end of this, the beginning of a discussion. It's not the end of one. So I really welcome that. And so again, your like all your support, because if you're watching this far, you're definitely like like held a special place in my heart. I'm totally showing up for you, and you're showing up, and it feels really great. But yeah, please, like and subscribe if you want to keep, if you want to encourage me, comment if you want to provide direction, and or for myself or even other people who may benefit from it. But anyway, thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you soon. All right, bye.